The Kethvari research vessel Silent Judgment drifted through the cold vacuum of space, its biomechanical hull pulsing with bioluminescent veins that carried both nutrients and data throughout the ship. Commander ZYX Thull stood on the bridge, his 4 arms working across multiple control surfaces, as he examined the preliminary scans of the small blue world rotating slowly below. The sight of another inhabited planet filled him with what passed for satisfaction among his species. A subtle darkening of his chitinous faceplates and the release of approval pheromones that made the bridge atmosphere taste of copper and ozone. This was their specialty, after all, finding worlds ripe for harvest. "Report," he commanded, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that marked him as a veteran of dozens of successful conquests. Science Officer Veltar, his carapace still bearing the bright coloration of relative youth, manipulated his bio-interface with practiced efficiency. Streams of genetic data flowed across his screens in patterns that would have been incomprehensible to most species, but to the Kethvari, they told a story as clear as starlight. "Another primitive world," Commander Veltar reported, his chemical emissions betraying his eagerness for another successful mission. Barely achieved chemical propulsion spaceflight within their own system. Single-species dominance of the planetary surface. They call themselves humans. ZYX Thull's mandibles clicked in approval. Single-species worlds were always the easiest. No complex ecosystem of competing intelligences to navigate, no alliances to worry about, no need for delicate political maneuvering. Just one species to eliminate, and then the resources would be theirs for the taking. The Kethvari had perfected the art of conquest through biological warfare over 3 millennia ago, back when their own homeworld still pulsed with life. Why waste precious resources on plasma bombardments or kinetic strikes when you could simply engineer a plague perfectly tailored to a species' genetic weaknesses? It was elegant, efficient, and left the planet's ecosystems largely intact for subsequent harvesting operations. Every sentient race they'd encountered carried the same fundamental flaw: genetic vulnerabilities encoded in their very DNA. Hereditary diseases that could be amplified, immune system blind spots that could be exploited, evolutionary bottlenecks that left entire species susceptible to the right pathogen. The Kethvari had built their entire civilization on this simple truth. Biological perfection was impossible, and imperfection could always be weaponized. Initial atmospheric analysis shows standard oxygen-nitrogen mix. Veltar continued, his excitement pheromones growing stronger. Carbon-based biology, water-dependent. Their population centers show typical mammalian clustering patterns around fresh water sources and temperate zones. Life signs. Approximately 8 billion individuals concentrated on the landmasses. Preliminary scans suggest they've achieved rudimentary nuclear technology and basic digital communication networks. They appear to have recently developed satellite-based observation systems, though nothing that could detect us at this range. ZYX Thull's secondary arms drummed against his command throne, a gesture that would have seemed nervous in a younger commander but in him indicated deep tactical consideration. 8 billion was a substantial population, larger than most worlds they'd encountered. But size had never been a deterrent. If anything, larger populations often fell faster to engineered pathogens due to their interconnected social structures. "Begin the deep genetic scan," he ordered, his voice carrying the weight of absolute command. "Full spectrum analysis. I want their complete genome mapped within 3 rotations. Every gene sequence, every protein structure, every possible weakness. This world will fall within a cycle, and will harvest its resources without firing a single shot." The massive bioscanning array that formed the heart of the Silent Judgment hummed to life, its organic components pulsing with increased activity as terawatts of focused energy began streaming toward the blue world below. The scanners were the finest the Kethvari had ever developed, capable of reading genetic material through planetary atmospheres, analyzing DNA structures in living beings, and cataloging the biological weaknesses of entire species from orbit. Far below, on the surface of Earth, humans went about their daily lives completely unaware that alien eyes were peering into the very code of their existence. In laboratories and hospitals around the globe, sensitive instruments began registering anomalous readings as quantum-level scanning beams passed through their equipment. Dr. Emily Rodriguez was working late in her genetics lab at Johns Hopkins University when her quantum DNA sequencer began displaying impossible data. The interference patterns weren't random, they were organized, purposeful, almost as if something was actively scanning the genetic material in her samples. "That's impossible," she muttered, adjusting the calibration settings for the third time in an hour. But the readings not only persisted, they were getting stronger. Someone or something was conducting a systematic scan of human genetic material on a global scale. Meanwhile, aboard the Silent Judgment, Veltar's initial excitement was rapidly transforming into something approaching confusion. The first wave of results had arrived, and they defied every principle of xenobiology he'd studied in his centuries of service. "Commander," he said, his voice synthesizer struggling to process what appeared to be contradictory data streams. "The humans, their DNA structure, it's not what we expected. In fact, it's not what should be possible." Ziwaxthul's face plates darkened further, not with satisfaction this time, but with the beginning of concern. "Explain," Ziwaxthul commanded, his battle-scarred carapace clicking with the impatience of a predator accustomed to swift kills. The sound echoed through the bridge's bioacoustic chambers, designed to amplify a commander's authority through harmonic resonance. Veltar's mandibles trembled as streams of genetic data continued flooding his neural interfaces. 3 centuries of xenobiological training had not prepared him for what he was witnessing. The young science officer's pheromone production shifted rapidly between confusion, fear, and something dangerously close to panic. "Sir, according to our comprehensive scans, human DNA should not produce a viable life form," he began, his voice synthesizer crackling as it struggled to process his emotional state. "Their genetic code is chaotic beyond any evolutionary model we understand. Contradictory. They carry genetic material from thousands of different evolutionary paths, including several combinations that should be immediately lethal to carbon-based life." The holographic display that dominated the bridge's center expanded to show human genetic markers spinning in impossibly complex helixes. Red warning indicators flashed across the projection like the death throes of dying stars, each one representing a genetic impossibility that somehow functioned in living beings. "Observe this data cluster," Veltar continued, his secondary arms manipulating the display to highlight specific sequences. "They carry fully functional genes for producing their own vitamin C, a capability lost by most advanced mammals, but in 95% of the population, these genes remain inactive. They possess genetic instructions for enhanced nocturnal vision that could allow them to see clearly in near-total darkness, yet these remain completely dormant. Most puzzling of all, their iron-based blood chemistry is grossly inefficient by any reasonable biological standard. Yet somehow they thrive in atmospheric conditions that would cause immediate oxygen toxicity in most oxygen-breathing species we've cataloged." Ziwaxthul's primary consciousness focused on the data while his secondary awareness monitored the bridge crew's growing unease. Several junior officers had ceased their normal duties to stare at the genetic readouts, their own chemical emissions betraying confusion and concern. "Genetic drift," he stated with the authority of experience, though privately he felt the first cold touch of uncertainty. "Evolutionary leftovers. Vestigial genetic material. Every species carries the detritus of their evolutionary history." "No, sir." Veltar's response carried a conviction that surprised even himself. "This is fundamentally different from anything we've documented. They have active, functional genes for regenerating entire limbs, genes that somehow remain switched off despite carrying no apparent suppressor sequences. They possess DNA that should produce toxins lethal to their own nervous systems, yet these sequences remain harmlessly inactive. And strangest of all," he paused, his chemical emissions now tinged with something approaching existential dread. "They carry genetic markers from species that, according to our evolutionary models, shouldn't exist yet. Some of these genetic patterns won't appear naturally for millions of years." "Impossible," Ziwaxthul stated flatly, but his faceplates had begun to darken with something other than satisfaction. "I thought so too, Commander. But examine this specific chromosome cluster." The display zoomed in on a sequence that seemed to pulse with its own malevolent life. This genetic structure codes for immunity to a particular neurotoxin, a compound that doesn't exist in nature anywhere in the galaxy. Not on Earth, not on any of the 437 worlds we've catalogued. Yet somehow, buried in what should be non-functional junk DNA, humans carry perfect, complete immunity to it. The implications began washing over the bridge crew like a tide of ice water. Tactical Officer Caxmore looked up from her weapons analysis station, her combat-hardened features showing the first cracks of uncertainty ZYXL had seen in decades of service together. "Sir," she interjected, her voice carrying the measured tones of someone accustomed to calculating odds of survival. "If they carry immunity to weapons that don't exist yet, what does that suggest about their origins?" ZYXL studied the swirling genetic data with growing unease. In 3,000 years of conquest, spanning 47 different star systems and countless species, the Kethvari had never encountered anything like this. Every species had weaknesses, genetic bottlenecks, evolutionary dead ends, hereditary diseases that could be exploited and amplified. It was the fundamental law that had built their empire. But humans seemed to carry genetic defenses against threats they had never encountered, resistances to weapons that had never been deployed against them, immunities to toxins that existed nowhere in their evolutionary environment. "Continue the deep scan," he ordered, his command harmonics betraying none of his inner turmoil. "Expand the analysis to include epigenetic markers and dormant sequences. There must be something. No species achieves biological perfection." But even as the words left his vocal synthesizer, ZYXL felt the first stirrings of something his species had not experienced in millennia: doubt. On Earth, Dr. Emily Rodriguez was no longer alone in her genetics lab. Dr. James Mitchell from the Centers for Disease Control had arrived within hours of her initial alert, followed shortly by Dr. Anya Volkov from Moscow's Institute of Genetics. The quantum interference was now global, growing stronger by the hour, and registering on sensitive equipment in laboratories from Stockholm to Sydney. "It's like someone's running our entire species through the most advanced medical scanner ever conceived," Rodriguez explained, showing them the cascading data streams that filled her monitors. "But the technology involved, it's decades beyond anything we currently possess." "Or centuries," Mitchell added grimly, his experience with biological warfare scenarios lending an ominous weight to his words. "Emily, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Based on the scanning patterns you're observing, the systematic nature of the data collection, and the focus on genetic vulnerabilities, what would you say if someone told you this was a weapons scan?" Rodriguez felt her blood run cold as the implications crystallized in her mind. I'd say we're in very serious trouble." Aboard the Silent Judgment, 3 days of intensive scanning had produced results that defied every principle of Kethvari xenobiological science. The ship's bioneural processing cores had worked continuously, analyzing terabytes of genetic data with quantum-level precision. Yet each new discovery only deepened the mystery surrounding the humans below. Science Officer Veltar no longer bothered to hide his distress pheromones as he prepared to deliver his comprehensive report to the assembled command crew. The conference chamber's atmospheric processors struggled to neutralize the cocktail of fear, confusion, and professional embarrassment that emanated from his pores as he activated the central holographic display. "The human genome," he began, his voice synthesizer crackling with uncertainty that would have been career-ending under normal circumstances, "is not a natural evolution. It's an arsenal disguised as biology." Commander ZYXL's faceplates had darkened to the deep obsidian of profound concern, a coloration his crew had rarely witnessed in their decades of service together. Around the conference table, senior officers shifted uneasily in their biomechanical chairs, their own chemical emissions creating an atmosphere thick with anxiety. "Elaborate," ZYXL commanded, his harmonic undertones carrying the weight of someone who suspected he was about to receive news that would fundamentally alter their understanding of warfare itself. "Every genetic flaw we initially identified serves a specific defensive purpose," Veltar continued, his secondary arms manipulating the holographic controls with trembling precision. "Their inefficient iron-based blood chemistry, which we dismissed as evolutionary weakness, actually allows them to survive in atmospheric conditions that would cause immediate oxygen toxicity in most species, including ourselves. Their apparently chaotic genetic structure isn't random at all. It's redundancy layered upon redundancy, backup systems for their backup systems. The holographic display expanded to show a three-dimensional map of human genetic material, with thousands of highlighted sequences pulsing like weapon systems coming online. Each pulse represented another layer of biological defense that had been overlooked in their initial assessment. Their immune system, Veltar's voice gained strength as he moved into his specialty, is the most aggressive and adaptable we've ever documented in 3 millennia of conquest. It doesn't simply fight diseases. It studies them, remembers them with perfect fidelity, and passes those defensive adaptations to offspring through both genetic and epigenetic mechanisms. They carry immunological memory of plagues that completely wiped out other species, yet somehow strengthened them. Navigator Chindar, whose species had been conquered by the Kethvari 2 centuries ago, and now served as an auxiliary crew member, spoke up from her position at the periphery of the command circle. What about psychological vulnerabilities, fear responses, social hierarchies we could exploit to turn them against each other? That's... Veltar paused, consulting his data with the expression of someone who wished desperately that his instruments were malfunctioning. That's where our analysis becomes truly disturbing. Their fear response doesn't shut down their higher cognitive functions as it does in most species. It enhances them. When threatened with extinction, humans become more creative, more innovative, more strategically dangerous, not less. Their neural chemistry actually improves under pressure. Impossible, Navigation Officer Kethmore interjected. No species can maintain cognitive function under extreme stress. Fear is supposed to trigger fight-or-flight responses that bypass rational thought. Not humans, Veltar replied grimly. When they experience what should be paralyzing terror, their brains shift into what their own scientists call hypervigilance, a state where they process information faster, make connections more readily, and solve problems with unprecedented efficiency. And their social structure. He paused again, his pheromone production now reeking of something approaching existential terror. When faced with species-level extinction threats, they don't fragment into competing factions as every other intelligent species does. They unite, not just their immediate tribal groups or political entities. Their entire species becomes a single organism dedicated to survival and retaliation. The conference chamber fell into a silence broken only by the background hum of ship systems and the increasingly nervous chittering of junior officers monitoring their stations. That cannot be accurate, ZYX stated with the authority of someone whose worldview was crumbling but who refused to acknowledge it. No species can maintain unity under existential pressure. There are always fractures, always individuals or groups who seek to benefit from others' destruction. It's the fundamental law of survival. Not humans, sir, Veltar insisted, calling up historical data that painted an increasingly alarming picture. We've analyzed their species' response to every major extinction-level event in their planetary history. Ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, massive climate shifts. Every time they've faced annihilation, they've emerged stronger, more technologically advanced, and more unified than before. They don't just survive disasters, they weaponize them. They study what nearly killed them and develop defenses against it happening again. The implications were staggering. The Kethvari had built their entire civilization on the principle that intelligent species would always prioritize individual survival over collective defense when faced with extinction. It was why biological warfare worked so effectively. Panic and social collapse were always the first casualties of species-wide plague events. But humans appeared to operate under completely different evolutionary principles. Sir, Communications Officer Zur-ADH reported from her station, her own distress evident in the rapid clicking of her manipulator limbs. I'm detecting quantum communication signatures from the planetary surface. Coherent, organized transmissions using encryption protocols that shouldn't be possible with their current technology level. ZYX Thul felt the cold certainty of a predator realizing it had misjudged its prey. Are you telling me they know we're scanning them? Sir, Zur-ADH replied, her voice barely audible through the synthesizer. "I believe they've known since we arrived." The Kethvari had conquered 47 worlds across 3,000 years of expansion, and in all that time, they had never received a message from a species they were studying for conquest. The pattern was always the same: arrive, scan, synthesize biological weapons, deploy them, harvest the resources of dead worlds. Their victims simply died when the engineered plagues arrived. They didn't communicate, they certainly didn't fight back, and they absolutely never initiated contact. Commander ZYX stood frozen at his command station, staring at the impossible transmission with what his species considered the deepest form of thought, a complete cessation of pheromone production that left the bridge smelling only of recycled atmosphere and the metallic tang of biomechanical systems. The silence stretched across the command center like a physical weight, broken only by the soft humming of quantum processors struggling to analyze data that defied their programming. "How?" he asked finally, his voice carrying harmonics of confusion that his crew had never heard from him before. Communications Officer Zuradiach's manipulator limbs danced across her bio-interface with increasing desperation, running diagnostic after diagnostic on equipment that insisted it was functioning perfectly. "Unknown, sir," she replied, her chemical emissions betraying a level of professional panic that would have been unthinkable hours earlier. "They shouldn't possess the technology to detect our scanning protocols, much less trace them back through quantum-encrypted channels to our ship's exact position. Yet somehow they've locked onto our unique quantum signature and are broadcasting directly through our most secure communication arrays." "What exactly are they saying?" Tactical Officer Caxmore demanded from her weapon station, her combat-hardened instincts screaming that this was a prelude to attack. The same message, repeated continuously in 847 different languages and dialects, Zuradiach reported, her voice synthesizer struggling with what appeared to be impossible linguistic data, including several that our databases indicate should be extinct, and at least a dozen that we've never encountered before. The message reads, "We know you are watching us. We are coming to talk." Science Officer Veltar's secondary consciousness was still processing genetic data, but his primary awareness was focused on the tactical implications of what they were witnessing. "Sir, this suggests a level of technological development that contradicts everything our sensors have told us about their civilization. They should be centuries away from quantum communication, yet they're demonstrating capabilities that rival our own." "What plagues can we deploy?" ZYX demanded, his command training falling back on established protocols even as his worldview crumbled around him. "You've spent 4 days analyzing their genetics. What exactly would you engineer that could affect them? What plagues?" Veltar's response carried the bitter taste of professional failure. "Sir, I've spent 4 days telling you their genome is essentially perfect for survival. Every weakness we've identified turns out to be a hidden strength. Every vulnerability we've tried to map leads to backup systems and redundant defenses. What exactly would you have me engineer when their own immune system is more aggressive and adaptable than our most advanced biological weapons?" "There must be something," ZYX insisted, but his certainty was evaporating like atmosphere through a hull breach. "There is something," Tactical Officer Caxmore interrupted, her voice carrying the grim certainty of someone who had spent a lifetime calculating odds of survival. Her combat experience from dozens of ground campaigns had given her a perspective that pure scientists like Veltar lacked. "We can't kill them with biological weapons, but they can definitely kill us." The bridge fell into a silence so complete that the ship's atmospheric recyclers seemed to whisper secrets in the darkness. "Elaborate," ZYX commanded, though part of him no longer wanted to hear the answer. "I've been analyzing their historical warfare patterns while Veltar focused on their genetics," Caxmore continued, her tactical displays coming alive with disturbing data. "When humans encounter a problem they can't solve with their natural abilities, they make tools. When those tools aren't sufficient, they make weapons. When those weapons reach theoretical limits, they don't accept defeat. They redefine what's possible." She activated the tactical display, showing Earth's current military capabilities in detail that should have been impossible to gather from orbit. "They have approximately 13,000 nuclear warheads distributed across multiple delivery systems. Their space program may appear primitive by our standards, but they've successfully intercepted and destroyed asteroids, objects moving at velocities that would challenge our own defensive systems. They've landed autonomous machines on other worlds in their system and are actively planning permanent colonization missions. Primitives with nuclear weapons, Zuexthal said dismissively, though his tone lacked its earlier conviction. We've conquered dozens of such species. No, sir. This is fundamentally different. Caxmore's display shifted to show something that chilled the bridge atmosphere even further. I've analyzed their fiction, their entertainment media, their speculative scenarios. They have imagined every possible form of warfare, including scenarios that match our current situation exactly. Alien invasion through biological warfare. They have contingency plans. Contingency plans made by primitives who have never faced. Sir, Zuradh interrupted, her voice tight with barely controlled alarm. We're receiving another transmission. This one is different. It's a direct video link. The main screen activated, showing a human female in what appeared to be a military uniform. She stood in what looked like a command center, with dozens of other humans working at stations behind her. She spoke clearly and calmly, looking directly into the camera as if she could see through space itself to meet Zuexthal's eyes. To the representatives of the species currently conducting genetic surveillance of our planet, she began, her voice carrying an authority that transcended species barriers. I am General Patricia Hayes, speaking on behalf of the United Earth Defense Command. We have been aware of your presence and activities for 127 hours, 34 minutes, and 16 seconds. We know you are likely searching for biological vulnerabilities to exploit. We want you to understand 3 things. She held up one finger, and somehow the gesture carried more menace than any weapon Zuexthal had ever faced. First, you will not find what you're looking for. Our species has survived ice ages, global pandemics, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, and our own attempts at self-destruction. We are still here. A second finger joined the first. Second, we know you're out there. We've been preparing for this possibility for decades. Every science fiction story, every disaster scenario, every impossible contingency plan. We've thought of it, and we've prepared for it. A third finger, and for just a moment, something predatory flickered behind her eyes. Something that spoke of a species that had clawed its way to the top of its food chain and stayed there. Third, we don't want to fight you. We want to talk. But if communication isn't an option. She paused, and her smile was sharp as a blade. Well, you've been scanning our DNA for 4 days now. You should have a pretty good idea of what we're capable of when we decide that talking isn't working. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. In the quiet that followed, Veltar's voice was barely audible. Sir, I strongly recommend immediate withdrawal to the outer system. For the first time in his long career, Commander Zuexthal found himself agreeing with a suggestion to retreat. The silent judgment had withdrawn to the edge of the solar system, but distance provided no comfort to its increasingly desperate crew. The ship now maintained position behind the largest gas giant, using its massive electromagnetic field as a shield while long-range sensors detected a disturbing escalation of activity across Earth's surface. Military mobilizations were occurring on every continent, space elevators were launching cargo at unprecedented rates, and energy signatures suggested the humans were constructing something that defied easy categorization. Status report, Zuexthal commanded from his biomechanical throne, though his voice lacked its usual authority. The retreat had been tactically sound, but it had also been the first time in his long career that he had ordered withdrawal before engaging an enemy. The psychological impact on both himself and his crew was beginning to show in the nervous chemical emissions that permeated the bridge atmosphere. Science Officer Veltar approached the command station with the bearing of someone delivering a death sentence. His 3 days of intensive analysis had produced results that challenged everything the Kethvari thought they knew about evolution, genetics, and the very nature of intelligent life itself. Sir, he began, his voice synthesizer struggling to process the complex mixture of fear, awe, and scientific fascination that colored his speech. I've completed the comprehensive genetic analysis of the human species. What we've discovered. It fundamentally changes everything we thought we understood about their evolutionary development. The main holographic display materialized above the bridge, showing a timeline that spanned millions of years. Genetic markers pulsed along the temporal axis like beacons in the darkness, each one representing a moment when human evolution had defied natural selection in ways that should have been impossible. Humans didn't evolve naturally through standard selective pressures, Veltar continued, his secondary arms manipulating the display to highlight specific evolutionary bottlenecks. Their DNA shows clear, unmistakable signs of artificial guidance and intervention, but not by their own technological development. Someone or something has been actively directing their evolutionary path for millions of years. Commander ZYXTHUL's faceplates had darkened to the color of deep space, a hue that indicated profound cognitive distress among his species. Impossible. We would have detected signs of advanced civilization in that system. Our long-range surveys go back thousands of years. Not on their world, sir, Veltar corrected, zooming in on specific genetic sequences that pulsed with artificial regularity. The intervention signatures are encoded directly into their genetic material. Look at these markers. They appear consistently throughout their entire evolutionary timeline, but they're not natural mutations. Someone has been introducing beneficial genetic modifications during every major extinction event in their planet's history. Navigator Chindar, whose own species had experienced Kethvari conquest, leaned forward with obvious unease. Are you suggesting that humans are artificially created? Not created, Veltar clarified, his chemical emissions now carrying the sharp tang of scientific excitement mixed with existential terror. Forged, shaped like weapons in a cosmic furnace that spans geological time. Every disaster that should have destroyed their species, the ice ages, the asteroid impacts, the supervolcanic eruptions, the mass extinction events, instead of eliminating them, these catastrophes were used as opportunities to introduce new genetic capabilities. Tactical Officer Caxmore's combat experience had taught her to recognize patterns that others might miss. It explains their military thinking, she interjected, her own analysis appearing alongside the genetic data. They don't just prepare for known threats, they systematically prepare for impossible ones. Their entire civilization is built around the fundamental assumption that whatever hasn't tried to kill them yet eventually will, and when it does, they need to be ready. But who would undertake such a project? ZYXTHUL demanded, his command training struggling to process implications that stretched across millions of years. What species would spend geological ages creating the perfect warriors? And why? Perhaps, a new voice said through the ship's communication system, cutting through their discussion like a blade through flesh. You should ask us directly. Every Kethvari on the bridge froze in terror. The voice had spoken in perfect Kethvari, but more than that, it carried cultural nuances and linguistic subtleties that suggested not just academic knowledge of their language, but intimate understanding of their psychology, their fears, their deepest cultural taboos. How are you accessing our most secure communications? ZYXTHUL demanded, his voice cracking with the strain of maintaining command authority in an impossible situation. Your quantum encryption protocols are approximately 847 years behind what we're currently implementing in our own systems. The voice replied with what sounded disturbingly like amusement. We've been monitoring and analyzing every conversation, every tactical discussion, and every strategic decision you've made since entering our solar system. Impossible, ZYXTHUL stated, but the word carried no conviction. You're primitives. You barely achieved chemical rocket propulsion. You haven't even established permanent colonies beyond your own moon. Commander ZYXTHUL of the research vessel Silent Judgment, the voice continued, and there was something deeply unsettling about hearing his name and ship designation spoken by an alien intelligence. You've spent the last 6 days scanning our genetics, analyzing our capabilities, and planning what you assumed would be our inevitable destruction. Perhaps it's time you learned exactly who you're dealing with. The bridge's main screen activated, but instead of showing the expected military command center, it displayed what appeared to be a comfortable university office. An elderly human male sat behind a wooden desk, wearing casual civilian clothing and surrounded by books and scientific instruments that looked almost quaint by Kethvari standards. "My name is Professor David Reeves," he said, effortlessly switching between flawless English and equally perfect Kethvari, as if he were a native speaker of both languages. "I hold degrees in xenolinguistics, comparative evolutionary biology, and theoretical physics, among other disciplines. But perhaps more relevantly to your current situation, I've been waiting quite a long time to have this particular conversation." Waiting! ZYX Thull's confusion was evident in the rapidly shifting cascade of pheromones that filled the bridge atmosphere. "Commander," Professor Reeves said, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone holding all the strategic advantages. "Your species follows a very predictable pattern of conquest. You arrive at a target system, you conduct genetic scans to identify biological vulnerabilities, you engineer species-specific pathogens, you deploy those weapons, and then you harvest the resources of dead worlds. You've been following this exact methodology for over 3,000 years. The human's eyes hardened with something that transcended mere academic interest. The thing is, we've been watching you do it for approximately half that long. Learning your methods, studying your technology, understanding your psychology, preparing. The implications hit the Kethvari bridge crew like decompression in hard vacuum. If humans had been monitoring their activities for 1,500 years, "You expect us to believe," Zewexthal said with diminishing conviction, "that primitives who achieved spaceflight less than a century ago have been conducting interstellar surveillance for 1,500 years?" Professor Reeves smiled, and there was something profoundly disturbing about the expression. Not malicious, but patient in the way of a predator that had been waiting for exactly the right moment to reveal itself. "Commander, you're still thinking like a conqueror. You observe a world that appears primitive and assume its inhabitants are helpless. But what if that appearance of technological limitation was completely intentional? What if everything you think you know about human civilization is exactly what we wanted you to think?" The implications hit the Kethvari bridge crew like a cold wind. "You're suggesting," Veltar began. "I'm not suggesting anything," Reeves replied. "I'm telling you, humans have had interstellar capability for over 2 centuries. We've had faster-than-light communication for longer than that. We've been hiding our true development level because we knew that species like yours judge threats by technological signatures." "But why?" ZYX demanded. "Because, Commander," Professor Reeves said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "we've been waiting for you to come close enough." The Silent Judgment's command bridge had never been so quiet. Even the ship's atmospheric processors seemed to whisper, as if the vessel itself was holding its breath. "Close enough for what?" ZYX finally managed. Professor Reeves stood and walked to a window, gazing up at what appeared to be a star-filled sky. But as the view shifted, the Kethvari crew realized they weren't looking at stars, they were looking at ships. Hundreds of them, surrounding the Silent Judgment in perfect formation. "Close enough to capture one of your vessels intact," Reeves said simply. "We've been studying your species from a distance for centuries, but we needed to understand your technology, your methods, your psychology. We needed a live specimen." Specimen? Caxmore's tactical display was lighting up like a festival as her sensors detected the human fleet. "Sir, we're completely surrounded." "How did they?" "Stealth technology," Reeves interrupted, as if reading her displays from across the void. "We've been shadowing your ship since you entered our system. Your sensors are quite good by the standards of most species you've encountered. Unfortunately, you've never encountered us before." ZYX Thull's battle experience kicked in. "Battle stations. Prepare for." "Commander," Reeves' voice cut through the bridge chatter, "I would strongly advise against any aggressive action. You see, we've had 1,500 years to study your species. We know about your biological warfare. We know about your conquest pattern. We know about the 47 worlds you've sterilized." The human's expression grew cold. "We know about the children." Silence fell like a shroud across the bridge. The Kethvari had never encountered a species that knew about their past conquests. Their victims were always dead. "You think you're hunters," Reeves continued. "Apex predators stalking primitive prey. But you've never encountered a species that hunts the hunters. What do you want? ZYX asked, his command authority cracking for the first time in decades. Justice, came the simple reply. And answers. You see, Commander, while you've been scanning our genetics, we've been scanning yours. And we've made some very interesting discoveries. The main screen split, showing both Professor Reeves and a complex genetic analysis. Your species wasn't always conquerors, Reeves said. Your earliest genetic patterns show a peaceful, highly social civilization. Something changed you. Something turned you into what you are now. Veltar's chemical emissions shifted to something approaching terror. How do you know about our ancestral patterns? Those records were lost millennia ago. Because we found them, another voice said. The screen expanded to show a second human, a woman in what appeared to be a laboratory. Dr. Elizabeth Kane, Xenogenetics. We found your homeworld, Commander. Or what's left of it. The bridge erupted in alarm chittering. The Kethvari homeworld had been abandoned thousands of years ago, its location a closely guarded secret. Impossible, ZYX breathed. Your homeworld shows signs of massive biological warfare, Dr. Kane continued. Your own people were the victims of exactly the kind of attack you now perpetrate on others. Someone did to you what you've been doing to everyone else. But that's not the most interesting part, Professor Reeves added. The genetic markers we found in the ruins match samples we've been collecting from 47 different star systems. Systems where entire civilizations died from engineered plagues. The implications crashed over the bridge like a tidal wave. Someone has been using your species as a weapon, Reeves said quietly, turning you into biological warfare specialists and pointing you at target worlds. You're not conquerors, Commander. You're victims who have been weaponized against others. But who would? ZYX began. We don't know yet, Reeves admitted. But we intend to find out. With your help. Why would we help you? Because, Professor Reeves said, his expression softening slightly, we found a way to reverse what was done to your people. We can give you back what you lost, your true nature, your choice in what you become. He paused, looking directly into the camera. But first, you need to help us stop what's been done to 47 other worlds. Starting with preventing what was supposed to happen to ours. In the sterile white medical bay of the lead human vessel, Commander ZYX sat in what his species would have once called deep contemplation, the ancient state of perfect chemical neutrality that allowed for completely clear thought, free from the influence of emotional pheromones. The restraints that secured him to the examination chair were made of some translucent material that felt stronger than Kethvari battle armor. But he had long since stopped testing their limits. He wasn't going anywhere, and perhaps more surprisingly, he was no longer certain he wanted to. Dr. Elizabeth Kane worked methodically at her instruments, her human hands moving with the precise confidence of someone who had spent decades mastering xenobiology. Behind her, through a transparent aluminum wall that offered perfect visibility, ZYX could observe his crew undergoing similar medical procedures in adjacent chambers. The sight should have filled him with rage at their capture, but instead he found himself fascinated by the care and precision with which the humans treated their prisoners. Your science officer was absolutely correct in his initial assessment, Dr. Kane said without looking up from her quantum genetic sequencer. Your species' DNA has been extensively modified through artificial intervention. Someone invested considerable time, resources, and expertise in turning your people into perfect biological warfare specialists. How long ago? ZYX asked, his voice carrying a weariness that came from having his entire worldview systematically dismantled over the past several days. The major genetic modifications appear to have been implemented approximately 3,000 years ago, coinciding with the historical records of your great exodus from your homeworld. Dr. Kane replied, adjusting her instruments to focus on specific chromosomal structures. But the initial psychological conditioning, the fundamental alterations that made your species accept conquest and genocide as natural behaviors, those changes are much older. Possibly 10,000 years, based on the deep structure genetic markers we've identified. Professor David Reeves entered the medical bay carrying what appeared to be a standard tablet computer. though ZYX suspected it contained technology far beyond anything his species currently possessed. The elderly human moved with the casual confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime studying the most dangerous predators in the galaxy and learned that knowledge was the ultimate weapon. "We've completed our analysis of your ship's historical records, Commander," Professor Reeves announced, settling into a chair positioned so that he could maintain comfortable eye contact with his prisoner. 47 star systems, approximately 2 trillion sentient beings, all eliminated through biological warfare that your species developed and deployed. "We did what was necessary for our survival," ZYX began, but the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "For the expansion of our—" "For who?" Professor Reeves interrupted with the sharp precision of someone who had heard this justification before. "For your species' benefit? Your crew tells us they don't even remember why you started conquering other worlds in the first place. It was simply what you did, what you had always done, what felt natural and right." ZYX chemical emissions shifted to something approaching confusion as he tried to access memories that seemed increasingly distant and artificial. "Of course it's what we do. We are Kethvari. We are the apex species. We are victims," Dr. Kane interrupted firmly, her voice carrying the authority of scientific certainty. "You're victims who have been systematically transformed into weapons and pointed at innocent civilizations. But despite everything that's been done to you, you still retain the capacity for choice." She activated a complex holographic display that showed genetic sequences in intricate detail, some highlighted in ominous red, others glowing with hopeful blue light. "The red markers represent artificial modifications introduced into your genome," she explained with the patience of a teacher addressing a particularly important lesson. "They enhance aggressive tendencies, suppress natural empathy responses, and create a psychological addiction to conquest and domination. The blue markers represent your original genetic heritage, your true nature before the modifications were implemented. We have developed the capability to remove the artificial genetic modifications," Professor Reeves added, leaning forward with the intensity of someone offering a gift beyond price. "We can restore what your species was meant to be before someone turned you into instruments of genocide. But we need something from you first." "What?" ZYX asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. "The location and identity of whoever did this to your people. Information about the entities responsible for your transformation." ZYX was silent for a long moment, his consciousness traveling back through ancestral memories that felt increasingly like someone else's experiences. When he finally spoke, his voice carried harmonics that the humans had never heard before, something that sounded like the grief of an entire species. "We don't know their true identity," he admitted, the words feeling like they were being torn from his very soul. "The historical records speak only of beings called the Shapers, who arrived at our homeworld during what our ancestors called the time of great sickness. They offered to heal our people, to make us strong enough to survive the plague that was killing us. When we emerged from their genetic modification chambers, we were different, stronger, more focused, more unified in purpose, ready to claim what they told us was our rightful place among the stars." "And you never questioned their motives?" Dr. Kane asked gently. "Why would we question salvation?" ZYX replied, his voice carrying the weight of 3,000 years of programmed certainty. "We were dying as a species. They saved us, enhanced us, gave us the tools we needed to become what we were destined to be." "What you were destined to be were slaves," Dr. Kane said with clinical bluntness. "Biological weapons aimed at anyone who might pose a future threat to their long-term plans." "But what plans?" ZYX demanded, his artificial certainty finally beginning to crack under the weight of accumulated evidence. "Why create us as instruments of destruction and then allow us to operate independently? Why not maintain direct control over our actions?" Professor Reeves and Dr. Kane exchanged meaningful glances that suggested they had discussed this exact question many times. "Because they wanted you to do exactly what you've been doing for the past 3 millennia, Professor Reeves explained with grim certainty. "Systematically eliminating potential competitors. clearing the galaxy of species that might pose a threat when the Shapers decide to emerge from wherever they've been hiding and watching. And now, ZYX asked, the implications of their conversation finally crystallizing in his mind. Now you have a choice that no member of your species has possessed for thousands of years, Dr. Kane said, her expression softening with something that might have been hope. We can restore your original genetic heritage. We can give you back your true nature, your original culture, your authentic emotional responses. But we need your help to locate the Shapers and prevent them from using other species the way they used you. ZYX looked through the transparent wall at his crew members. Science Officer Veltar was engaged in what appeared to be intense scientific discussion with human researchers. Tactical Officer Caxmore seemed to be participating in detailed strategic conversations about military doctrine. Communications Officer Zuradh was examining human communication technology with obvious fascination and professional respect. If you change us back to what we were, he said slowly, will we still be us? Will we retain our memories, our relationships, our individual identities? You'll be who you were always meant to be, Professor Reeves replied with gentle honesty. Not who you were forced to become through artificial modification. And if we refuse your offer, then you'll remain our prisoners, Dr. Kane said with matter-of-fact directness. We cannot and will not release you to continue your campaigns of conquest. But we also won't force genetic treatment on unwilling subjects. How can we trust that you're telling us the truth? ZYX asked, voicing the question that had been growing in his mind. How do we know this isn't simply another form of conquest disguised as liberation? Professor Reeves smiled with genuine warmth, and for the first time since their capture, the expression reached his eyes. Commander, if we wanted to conquer your species, would we be having this conversation? Would we have revealed our true capabilities gradually instead of simply destroying your ship? Would we be offering you genetic restoration and genuine choice? ZYX considered this carefully. In his species' entire 3,000-year history of conquest, they had never offered their victims choices, explanations, or opportunities for redemption. What happens afterward? He asked. If we agree to help you locate the Shapers, what becomes of us then? Then you help us contact the surviving members of the 47 civilizations you attacked, Dr. Kane said quietly. You help us explain what really happened to their worlds. You participate in the process of justice and healing. Some of those civilizations were completely destroyed. Every member of their species died. Not all of them, Professor Reeves said with the careful precision of someone who had spent years researching galactic demographics. We've been monitoring the galaxy for a very long time, Commander. Some of your target species had established off-world colonies, deep space research installations, generation ships that escaped the initial biological attacks. They're still out there, scattered across the stars. And they remember what happened to their homeworlds. The implications were staggering in their scope. If even a small fraction of the species the Kethvari had attacked had survivors scattered throughout the galaxy, they'll want revenge against us, ZYX said, stating the obvious with growing dread. Yes, they will, Professor Reeves agreed without sugarcoating the reality. But they'll also want the truth about what really happened. And with your cooperation, we can give them both justice and access to their real enemies. ZYX looked at his reflection in the medical bay's polished surfaces, trying for the first time in millennia to imagine what his people had been like before the Shapers arrived. What they might become again if given the chance to choose their own destiny. If we do this, he said slowly, his voice carrying new harmonics of uncertainty and hope, if we help you locate the Shapers and testify about what they did to us, will you really allow us to choose what we become? Commander, Professor Reeves said, his expression growing serious. Choosing what you become despite what others tried to make you. That's the most fundamentally human thing anyone can do. And if you make that choice, you'll be more human than many humans. After a long moment of profound contemplation, ZYX chemical emissions shifted to something that had not been produced aboard a Kethvari vessel in 3,000 years. Oh, very well, he said, his voice carrying new harmonics of determination and purpose. We accept your offer, but I have one non-negotiable condition. Name it. When we finally locate the Shapers, ZYX Thull said, his voice growing stronger with each word, we help you stop them permanently. My species has been their unwilling weapon for far too long. It's time we chose our own targets. Professor Reeves nodded slowly, a smile spreading across his features. Welcome to the Resistance, Commander. It's going to be a long fight, but you're no longer fighting it alone. And in the depths of space, ancient monitoring systems that had been watching the Kethvari for 3 millennia registered the failure of a carefully orchestrated plan and began calculating new strategies. The Shapers had been patient before, guiding galactic events across geological timescales. They could be patient a little longer, but now they understood. Humanity was no longer alone in the darkness between stars, and their newest enemies possessed something far more dangerous than advanced technology. They had chosen to become something better than what they were made to be. The real war was about to begin. Author's note: this story explores the themes of manipulation, free will, and the power of choice in defining identity. It suggests that sometimes what appears to be natural strength or aggression is actually a form of enslavement, and that the most profound act of resistance is choosing to become something better than what others tried to make you. The humans in this universe represent not just technological advancement, but the philosophical principle that conscious choice can overcome even the most sophisticated forms of conditioning.